Well, hello again, everyone, and welcome back into Conversations with Dr. Charles, sponsored here by Emmy. If you'd like more information on Emmy, please be sure to go to emmy.co. That's emmy.co, immy.co. And also, if you'd like to get notified when we put on extra versions of this conversation and others, be sure to hit the subscribe button below and you'll get notified readily when that happens. So this gentleman that you see sitting here with me today, once again, if you've not met him before through these videos, this is Dr. Charles Akle. Charles, good morning. Great to be with you again.
Hi, Pat. Always a pleasure to talk to you and, try and explain things. It'd be great.
Wonderful. Well, if you've not met Charles before, he's the Chief Medical Officer here at Emmy. Charles has a great background, as you would imagine. He is based in the UK. Charles is a fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons, trained in medicine at Guy's Hospital in London. He spent his career researching immunology and also working a lot in transplant medicine. So Charles, once again, you've had an incredible life, and it's all focused now back on immunology and a variety of things related to that we get into conversations about here. And today is kind of a unique one in that we're going to talk about a condition that doesn't have a lot of notoriety and it's not well known, particularly here in the States. But the WHO is actually talking about it now for the 55th year, acknowledging ME. Why don't you explain what exactly is ME and why is it relevant, particularly in these post-COVID days?
Oh, you're absolutely right, Pat. ME stands for myalgic encephalopathy. Myalgia, pain in the muscles, encephalopathy, I suppose, fuzzing of the brain.
Yeah.
But it's also known in a dustbin diagnosis as post-viral syndrome, even yuppie flu. It was known as a few years ago. And it's always been slightly laughed at, and the medical profession have taken a long time to recognize that it exists as a syndrome, whereas every patient who's been affected by it will tell you it's real. And what really annoys the patient is that nobody listens or nobody seems to listen. And it's only since COVID and the fact that COVID swamped us with cases that the post-viral cases, the myalgic encephalopathy, the post-viral syndrome has become so obvious that even the dumbest doctor has to admit that, look, this thing exists, right? And so one of the reasons that it doesn't exist, and by the way, it's a very debilitating disease. And I speak from experience because my own son got two viruses at the same time on a field trip out to Africa at the age of 17. And the poor boy basically spent 12 years in bed.
Oh, wow.
And melted away, couldn't eat, belly symptoms, fuzzy brain, lost university. So, it's horrible. It's very real. And actually, if I've achieved nothing in my tiny life, the fact that I worked on the immunology and the precursor to IMI, he was one of the first patients to actually receive what we were using as a sort of vaccine, a mycobacterial sister to Mycobacterium aurum, which is IMI.
Yes.
And it was miraculous. It was fantastic, the effect it had on retuning his immune system. So now what is it? And the answer is, if you look at COVID, what happens is you get a viral infection, which knocks your immune system out of the park. And it doesn't restore in the way that you expect it to. So the problem is that you've got all the cells, you've got all the markers that the doctors normally measure, your white cell count, your sedimentation rate, all those things. They look normal. And so that you go to the doctor, it does the blood test, they're normal, nothing wrong with you. But if you take the patient's blood and you run those tests by driving the immune cells for a response, you then realize that they're not functioning properly. So it's exactly like a car. Car's not working properly. You take it to the garage. When it's idling, you go into the garage, the guy puts it on the computer, says, oh, nothing wrong with your car. It's only when you take it out on the highway and you drive it, or you try to accelerate, or you try to get it to function, and it then stutters and it doesn't work properly. And that's how we now understand it and how we look for it. And so it's a real entity.
Yes, absolutely. Charles, it sounds related to things that we hear that are difficult to diagnose, or maybe they've been made difficult to diagnose. Things like chronic fatigue syndrome. Is it related to that in some way, or is that a manifestation?
That's just another name again
Okay.
for yuppie flu, myalgic.
Okay.
It's a variation. Chronic fatigue. They're exhausted all the time. You can call it all sorts of things. But the interesting thing is that World ME Day is coming up in a few days'
May
time.
12th. Yes.
Yeah, May the 12th, which is why this is a particularly appropriate broadcast. And it's been going on for years. The problem is the patients are often labeled as neurotic. And the truth of the matter is, if nobody's listening to you, if you weren't neurotic to start with, you soon get to be neurotic by the time you finish, because nobody's listening. And if I just hate that just because you don't understand something and you can't measure it, doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Of course.
So an interesting point, just about World ME Day. It was really, I suppose, to honor Florence Nightingale, and many in the States may not know about her, but Florence Nightingale was a redoubtable Victorian lady. She was born in 1820 and went against all the rules of being a good woman and just going and having babies and things, and went into nursing. And she ran an institution called the Hospice for Sick Gentlewomen. And this was in Harley Street. And my career, 25 years of my life, was spent in Nightingale House on the site of where she had that hospital for sick gentlewomen. And on manifestations that you can't see, the house was always supposed to be haunted, and she was supposed to come round in the middle of the night. Well, she never did us any harm. In fact, she did us a lot of good, bless her. And in 1854, she left to work in the Crimea. There was a big fight that Britain was involved with, and the soldiers were dying from sepsis and all sorts of horrible things. And she then instituted, she was basically the woman who put modern nursing on the map. And she did it because she kept good statistics. It was the fact that she had data in terms of statistical data that persuaded the authorities that washing the floors and cleaning the wounds and doing all these basic things and feeding the soldiers.
Things we take for granted.
Yeah, it was all taken for granted. And when she came back, she suffered almost certainly from ME, myalgic encephalopathy, whatever you want. Took to her bed from about 1860 till she died in 1910 at the age of 90. And she was fantastic, because if the way she persuaded the politicians was to call them round to her sick bed and pretend to be dying, and they would just do whatever it was just to shut her up. But she did establish the School of Nursing, the first School of Nursing at St. Thomas's Hospital in London. We Guy's people get a bit cheesed off because they were great rivals of ours, but we all work together now.
Right.
And the School of Nursing at St. Thomas's Hospital is her legacy, which is fantastic. So there you go, Florence Nightingale.
That's amazing. That's truly amazing. And Charles, I was on the World MEalliance.org website where you can get information about ME. And the stats that you referenced earlier in regards to the COVID impact are quite amazing. It was estimated that there were 17 to 30 million people around the globe who suffered from ME prior to COVID. Now they estimate in excess of 55 million.
Yeah.
Truly an epidemic. So help us understand from a medical perspective, what's going, we talk a lot, you and I, about the gut microbiome and the overall microbiome's impact and the requirement for diversity of the microbiome to be able to create a healthy body and a healthy system. Help us understand the inner workings that might be going on there.
Well, it's a great point. It's not just the microbiome, but also the interaction with the gut-brain axis, because this exhaustion and all these other things, the system doesn't work in isolation. The body is a complex web, a neural network, if you like, but including everything. And what happens almost certainly is that because of the immune dysregulation that particularly COVID induces, it's really nasty because it's much worse than many other viral illnesses of the milder ones. But I mean, all viral illnesses can be lethal, but
Sure.
COVID was horrible at knocking the immune system. And what that then did was it altered the relationship between the body and the microbiome, which is the bugs that live in your gut and on the skin and everywhere. And so they weren't really functioning properly. Or if the patient had received antibiotics and they weren't eating properly and all these other things, the microbiome alters, and you get this dysfunctional milieu, entity. And that then affects the brain because the microbial, and it's not just bacteria, it's viruses and all sorts of other things that we don't actually all fully understand, have an effect on the immune system in the gut. The immune system in the gut definitely talks to the brain through the vagus nerve. There's a big, huge trunk. So the analogy, again, you may have heard me say, is it's a bit like the internet in your home. You can either plug into LAN and have a cable and get your internet that way, or you can do Wi-Fi. And the microbiome talks to the brain both by LAN, which is the vagus, and by the blood and lymphatic system, which is your Wi-Fi. Yes. And that interaction is two ways. It goes up and it comes back down again. The brain instructs the gut. So this whole thing comes back to yet another analogy, which is the orchestra. That you have this orchestra that needs to be played, but somebody or something has to coordinate it. And COVID knocks it for six. The conductor is thrown out of the way. The whole system doesn't work properly. I told you, my son was in bed basically for 12 years. I mean, it was fantastic. It was a very nasty virus that he picked up in Africa. But once you re-regulate it, and the whole point of having IMI, and IMI, the microlysibacterium that we talk about, is that it induces the orchestra to come back into tune. We're trying to retune the orchestra and get it to work. That means you've got some work to do. That means you have to feed your microbiome. You've got to do all the things that will help it to produce bacterial diversity, that you will take gentle exercise, that you don't smoke, that you take olive oil, that, and try and be happy. So you've got to do your bit as well. You can't just have your...
It's not a magic, it's not a silver bullet.
No, but by God, it helps.
though, Charles, you hit on something that we've had conversation about in other elements of this, and that is that, when you think about the gut-brain axis and the relationship between the two, there's two things I want to ask you about. So in relationship to the gut-brain axis, a metaphor that you've used previously is, imagine, that you're going up the hill on the huge roller coaster and you get to the top, and that anxiety that you feel coming, you feel it in the pit of your stomach. There's one proof of the gut-brain axis, the impact of the two. The other is, we have a lot of comments from people saying, hey, I took IMI today and I didn't feel anything, and you talk about re-regulation and that it's a process. Talk a little bit more about that. It's, some people like me, you and I have had conversation that I was having sleep issues. When I started taking IMI, I felt it within 3 or 4 days. I started sleeping more soundly, but not everyone feels that. There's a re-regulation that occurs. So maybe speak to that a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, in life, life's lottery, you have to buy a ticket. That means you can't expect everything to be handed to you on a plate. You've got to do your own contribution, but you've got to get it right. And certainly, if you are very fit and you're eating a good, healthy diet and life is treating you well, etc., you don't really need re-regulation, except in the long term, where we're now beginning to see issues, even with happy people, of things like chronic inflammatory diseases manifested as Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's disease, and cancer. There's an epidemic going on at the moment of young people, and I'm talking about under 50, with cancer, which we never used to see. Where have they all come from? Looking at their microbiome, we see that is definitely altered, and we're very suspicious that what's been going on is people are eating the wrong kind of food, ultra-processed food, et cetera, et cetera. So you need to buy a ticket, and that means you have to do a little bit of work. You have to go out there and get as many different kinds of fruit and vegetable, and avoiding meat particularly, but fruit, vegetable, and we're talking about proper organic healthy food that you can then consume, whether you juice it as I do every day, or whether you eat it as part of a routine kind of Mediterranean diet during the week. I don't mind, as long as you get it on board.
Right.
You need to eat fermented food. That means yogurt, whether you prefer kefir, kimchi,
sauerkraut.
Sauerkraut is great. Cheeses, lots of nice cheese, and I don't mean processed cheese. The processed cheese you see at the supermarket, I mean, you could build a house with that. I mean, it's disgusting. You've got to have proper cheese, right? And then there are other things like olive oil. Olive oil, just a spoonful of olive oil every day is enough to make a fantastic difference. We don't know why, but it's probably to do with the way it feeds the bacteria, the way that they process lipids. And that, by the way, it seems to be the link that goes up to the dementia story. So, but you still need to orchestrate. So the idea is to get as many, you'll read in the papers, and lots of companies will try and sell you, monitoring systems, get your stool culture done, and this, that, and the other. And I have to say, they're not, I mean, I've got no axe to grind, but if you send the same stool sample to two different laboratories, you get two different results.
Right.
If you send two stool samples to the same laboratory, you get two different results. So I'm very suspicious that they're missing something. They're missing the totality of what is needed.
Yes.
You need to make an effort. And they all come back with the same thing: eat more fruit, eat more vegetables, etc. But IMI is one of the critical factors that it helps us, say, to orchestrate, acts as the conductor. There are other things that do it, of course, but they're a bit more dangerous. Worms, by the way, are quite good at doing it, but I'm not recommending that you go out and start eating worms. We're not going to get much marketing done if
we've actually heard of parasitic worms being now in millions of people they're discovering. So.
And actually you need to have them the same way you've got to muck in the dirt, as long as you don't have too much. You don't want too much. So make an effort, bit of exercise, vary your diet, get food for the bacteria in your diet. So that's where the probiotics come in, whether you use bran, oat brans. I like psyllium husk, soluble fiber, because sometimes bran is too rough on the stomach, makes people think they've got gluten allergy when probably they haven't.
Right.
Wheat is quite rough. But psyllium husk, ispagula husk, or any of these softer soluble fibers, which you can look up, are absolutely wonderful. They're food for the bacteria, and they encourage this growth of the bacteria you want, not the bad bacteria. I hope that helps.
That's great. Let's put a cap on it. So I did a pause there that I'll talk to Juan about.
Yeah.
So let's put a cap on the back end of this. So Charles, thanks. What a great review of something that you said at the beginning of this gets missed by millions of people. They don't understand ME. We hear about it in the States and maybe all over the world, but certainly about chronic fatigue syndrome. And it's always one of those frustrating diagnoses. Like you said, some doctors just discount it. They don't believe it. It's like it's all in your head. We know now that's really not true. And so ME, which is myalgic encephalomyelitis, is a chronic condition now affecting, we believe, over 55 million people globally.
Easy.
And it all comes back again to your overall health, your gut condition, your microbiome condition and diversity. And so thank you for bringing this to our attention and for spending this time explaining what it is.
Great pleasure. And as I said, good luck out there, everybody. Even if it doesn't seem to be doing you any good, at least the IMI won't do you any harm, and in the long term may have this effect on dementia or cancer or whatever it is. So it's certainly worth taking it, even if it's just for that rather than for an immediate hit. So good luck, everybody.
Absolutely. Well, we hope you've enjoyed this time again in conversations with Dr. Charles Akle. We'll do them again on a variety of subjects. Once again, if you would like to get notified when these are fresh and new in YouTube, be sure to hit the subscribe button down there and go to immy.co, our website for IMMY, immy.co. Dr. Charles, thanks again. Look forward to seeing you soon.